Welcome to Toyota Time with Timothy Toolman and Sean, and returning guest, Fred. Hailing from Sacramento. What we are going to do today for Fred is Fred bought a rear third member and a front clamshell, which is synonymous with the front differential, from East Coast Gear Supply. And what Fred bought from them is he bought pre-installed ARB lockers that he wants to install on his rig. Now, we're going to concentrate on the front differential swap because we already have a video for the third member swap in existence. And if you want to check out that link, that you're going to do something just like Fred, click on that link right up above. The Saturday Night Fever point. Now, if you are doing your rear third member, this might be an opportunity for you to renew your rear wheel bearings and your seals, and maybe even in your retainers and ABS rotor if you choose to do that. But you can reuse those if you check out our video. So if you wanted to take advantage of the fact that you have your axles out and you wanted to do the bearings and seals and everything, you can click on that link up there also for that video. So let me show you the factory service manual, what areas of the factory service manual we're going to use. And then we're going to show you some of the parts that Fred bought for the job. He bought the rear third member, he bought the front clamshell, and then he bought also CV axles that are pre-booted with extended boots. So he bought CV axles from CVJ out of Denver, Colorado. Okay, so let me show you some factory service manual pages that we're going to be using. Okay, so starting in the suspension and axle area on page 26, of my 2000 Toyota factory service manual, it gives a nice schematic of all the breakdown of the front differential, how everything goes together with some torque specs. And so that's the first 2 pages. And then right here it shows some of the steps, and you get your skid plates out of the way, and then you got to remove the CV axles, and it refers you to suspension and axle page 16. So if we go to this part of the factory service manual, it tells you how to get your CV axles out. And then it goes on to say that you need to remove your front propeller shaft, and it refers you to that part of the factory service manual, the propeller shaft area. So there's these pages. So it tells you the torque specs and how to get the propeller shaft, or also known as a drive shaft, disconnected from the front differential. So it walks you through all the steps, and we're going to follow this pretty much to a T. So I like to make my own set of instructions. So I made a cheat sheet of all the steps that we're going to do for that front differential swap, including the torque specs, so I didn't have to go back and forth and look at the schematic pages. I got all the torque specs here ready to go. There it is there. So that's all the information we're using for the job. We didn't really consult any other videos in existence. We're doing this all from the factory service manual, and that's it. So here's a bunch of parts. No need to show you what a rear third member is and the front differential, because it looks no different than the one you have on your rig. The CV axles from CVJ out of Denver are unique because they put these silicone boots, and this is an extended boot. This is the inner boot, that's the outer boot. And so the silicone's supposed to last a little longer. Then it has this little O-ring deal. And what this O-ring is for is like anywhere where you have the ribs rubbing together, you put that between the ribs and it creates a little separation. So that's what that's for. And then this extended boot goes further than the normal boot. The normal boot would probably stop somewhere right here, so it extends it out, so it stretches it out and it's less prone to have the ribs rubbing together. So that's the reason for that. Oh, look at you. Okay, so here.
First step, take the skid plates off so it's easier to get to the clamshell.
Here you go. So here's a 12 and 13. So if you're wondering why would you want to put lockers in your truck, and what I did mention earlier is that Fred is actually changing his gear ratio too. He went from a 410 gear ratio to a 488. So first of all, lockers are good when you're going off-road. And if you get in a situation, an open differential, with the regular open differential, when one tire starts spinning, the other one doesn't do anything. So when you have a locker and you can lock it, it locks the 2 rear axles to where now they're turning at the same speed. And when you lock the differential, both the axles are spinning at the same time. Now, the reason for an open differential when you're driving down the road, you don't want it locked, is that when you go around a turn, the outside wheel, so if you're going around a left turn, the right wheel has to be spinning faster to go around that turn. If you tried to do a tight turn with your differential locked, it would be jumping because they're both turning at the same time. The outside wheel has to turn faster than the inside wheel on a turn. So that's the best way I could explain when you lock it. They're one for one. They're turning both at the same time. So that will get you better traction going up a steep hill or rock crawling or maybe stuck in the mud. That's why people do it. And plus it sounds cool when you go on the Toyota forum and you on your build thread and you say, yeah, I got lockers, and you don't. So anyways, so with the gear ratio, the reason why the gear ratio is that Fred has jacked up his truck with the lift, and he's got bigger tires than OEM. Okay, so he has 35s. He has 315 tires on his 4runner, and the gearing wasn't designed for that. So you have to change the gearing. So you basically get back to a better ratio to where you have good power. You can drive on the freeway at a good speed without, being too low in the RPMs or being too high in the RPMs. It just kind of brings you sort of back to stock by choosing the right gear ratio based off of the size tires and rims you're using. So I'm not an expert at this, but that's the best way I could describe it. So lockers are good for off-roading and talking about it on the Toyota forum, so you're cool. And then it's also good for just bringing your ratio back to a better ratio, so you have good power, not tacked out, not too low in your power band when you're driving around, looking cool in the mall parking lot. All right, that's it. All right, so the beginning of this job is exactly what you would do to replace your CV axles. We have a video for this already, and we're not going to show all the work to get to the point where you're pulling the CV axles out. If you want to look at that video, you could click on the link up above here, and then you'll know how to start the job. So after you get your CV axles out, that's where we're going to start filming to get the front differential disconnected from the vehicle and out, and then get the new differential back in with the ARB lockers that Fred bought from East Coast Gear Supply. All right, we got the front end jacked up. We got the frame supported on both sides with 6-ton jack stands. We have the parking brake set, and we have one of the rear wheels chalked 4.5 so it doesn't go anywhere. So now we're gonna take off the front wheels, and then we're gonna do the repair that I mentioned earlier. We're gonna go through the whole steps to get the CV axles out, and then we're gonna work on the front differential.
This is mediocrity.
Looks good. You know, I need to. Where's the? This is a 35 millimeter to take off the axle nut. Just like downtown, bruh. Remove the tie rod castle nut. It's a 19 millimeter. Get some type of puller on the outer tie rod and break it free of the knuckle of the ball joint. Get your cotter pin out, and then use a 24 millimeter to take the castle nut of the lower ball joint off. Get a puller on there and break the ball joint free of the lower control arm. We lifted the knuckle out of the lower control arm. Now we got to get the CV axle out of the hub. Tap it with a hammer, plastic or brass. Get yourself a pry bar between the CV axle and the differential tube and pry out the CV axle. I think that got it, huh? We got the CV axle out, now we're gonna do the other side. Before you start this operation, drain your differential. Remember to check that you can get the fill plug out first before you drain the drain plug, because if you can't get the fill plug out, then you're going to be forced to drive around with a differential with no gear oil. Not good. We're going to remove the front drive shaft connection at the differential and their 14 millimeter bolt and nut. Okay. Hey, check this out. Work smarter, not harder. I'm letting the 14 millimeter rest on the back part, and it's being held by the bell housing while I get this big long 14 millimeter to loosen them on the front. It works pretty good. Just be careful of these lines. Don't mash your power steering rack lines, but it works pretty good. You can actually go right in between the lines using the 14 millimeter resting up against the bell housing to hold the nut on the backside steady. It's a little hard, but not too hard. And turn. You get the idea. Same thing on all of them. So just remember the orientation. The bolt and washer go in towards the front differential, and then you put the nut on the other side of the flange for the connection. So you get your 4 bolts and nuts that connect the drive shaft to the front differential. You might be lucky and it just comes loose, but more than likely, get a plastic hammer or a brass hammer and pound on this to break it free of the flange. Okay, it looks like this one's gonna need a little persuasion. Oh, there we go. They didn't need a whole lot of persuasion. Now that's loose. So now the front differential can go out the front without this stopping it. So the next step is we're going to disconnect the ADD switch connector, automatic differential disconnect, and then we're going to disconnect the 2 ADD vacuum lines, and then we're going to disconnect the breather hose. So 3 hoses, 1 electrical connection. I'm going to work on getting the differential breather rubber tube off the metal line. So you have to get some type of bent nose, needle nose pliers would be the preferred method. Squeeze it. It's a constant tension clamp, and then pull it off of the fitting. Now the hard part is breaking this thing free, so I'm going to see if I can get that thing off. So what I'm using this spark plug wire puller, but it works good for getting hoses off. It's a little hard. I'm working from underneath, rocking the thing back and forth, trying to loosen up the hose on the metal line. It's coming off a little bit here. This is the left lower control arm, and I'm going up to through the left side where the CV axle used to be, and you got your power steering lines running right here. So I'm going down underneath using this spark plug wire puller, and I'm just working that rubber hose off the fitting. So this is the breather line for the differential. There we go, that one's free. Now we got to work on these 2 vacuum lines, and hopefully those will come off as easy as this one. So I use this little Harbor Freight special. It's just like a J-shaped little hook, and you just want to make sure that you don't puncture the vacuum line. But I just got against the metal and just kind of pried gently, and it's sliding right off. You just want to pierce it all the way. So once you get it loose, you could probably reach your hand up, yep, and it just slides right off. So there's number 1. Number 2, can't see.
Just right above it, yeah.
Okay, right here.
Okay. So these are the 2 vacuum lines for the automatic differential disconnect. This one that we got marked in red was a really hard to get off because it was slid on to a metal line about that far back. So you have to break the connection free. So we got some small screwdrivers. This wasn't the exact one, but we got a small screwdriver, slid it back to kind of break the connection free. And then again, we used these type of spark plug wire pullers and got it in this direction, got it on the line and pushed away to get this thing off. It was a bitch. I won't lie that this was, because that top one is slid so far onto the metal line, it's really hard to get off. The bottom one was really easy to get off. So again, these are the metal lines.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was the harder of the 2, the one that's marked red, because the rubber hose vacuum hose was slid on so far. This other one right next to it was a lot easier. And then this bigger one, the bigger metal pipe, that's where the rubber line for the breather connects to. So those 3 lines have to come off. Now we're going to get this electrical connection undone. This is for the ADD system. So what we've learned when doing these jobs, that no clip is exactly the same. This one, you press down on the back side of it and then you could get it done. We were pressing here thinking it was like other connectors, but you press down on the back and then you could pull it out. Like so. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
I was born ready, dog.
Okay, so this rear mount is a 12 millimeter Allen. So this is a 3/8 drive, the one I have. So I have a 1/2 inch to 3/8 reducer hooked up to a big Mamma Jamma breaker bar. And we're gonna try to break this free. Here we go. There we go. That wasn't so bad. I don't think the torque spec is super high on that. So right now at this step, you're starting to take the mounts off. You want to support the differential with the jack. We were thinking we can get a transmission jack, but the transmission jack has a very big plate and it would get in the way of taking the front mounts off. So we're using just a traditional jack and we're using just a plastic 2x4 in between because his truck is so high. So now we're working on getting the mounts done. So this is the rear mount. Not everybody has a 12 millimeter Allen size, so get yourself a set of these Allen sockets that go big enough if you don't have them. Look at that. That's a cool looking thing.
What?
Look at that,
Is that
bad
rubber?
boy. What is that? So is there a stud sticking through there? Or yeah, there is. So that has to actually, the differential has to come up to clear that, huh? I'm gonna remove one of the 2 front mounts now. So Fred's holding a 19 millimeter box end wrench on the top, and I'm gonna zip it free underneath with a 19 millimeter. Okay, breaker bar. That's pretty big time. That's like a welded on there, it was rusted. That's the sound of corrosion. Now they'll zip it off. So now the second front mount is we're gonna break it free with a big breaker bar too. With Fred holding. See, that's a lot of force that's breaking free there. Corrosion. There we go. Now it should spin it out. Okay. We saw some movement in the differential, didn't we? Did you see that?
Yeah.
Where's the nut? Is the nut up there still? That makes it a little more complicated. That it's a stud you got to clear.
Yep. Gloves.
Okay, so the rear mount has a stud that drops into this cross member. So here's the rear mount, and it's got a stud that sticks through. So that thing, that Allen, 12 millimeter Allen, that was actually a big, weird looking nut. And there's a stud sticking down, probably about a 1/2 inch. So we have to jack up and like maybe roll the differential a little forward. And there's not a whole lot of room between the differential and the bell housing. So we're hoping we can finagle this thing out. Now we're starting to understand when somebody told us this might be hard. Okay, it's fine. Oh shit. But it's fucking heavier than shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh shit. Okay, we have no jack anymore.
The flange on the rear of the differential, it's got to clear the bell housing. We got to go up with this and get it to. So we're experiencing some difficulty getting the front differential out. The flange that goes to the drive shaft is hooking on the bell housing and on the steering rack. And there's that rear mount's got a stud, and that stud is dragging against the cross member. So we're going to remove the 4 12 millimeter bolts that hold the transmission mount to this cross member number 3, and then we're going to get the transmission jack underneath the pan, hopefully push up the transmission and engine just enough to where we have a little more room for that flange on the differential to clear the bell housing and clear the steering rack. So we're jacking up underneath the transmission to see if we can get a little extra room.
Holy guacamole.
Okay, I think that's all we got. Okay, that's a little extra room. It's got to pick up on that front.
Yeah. Okay, now where?
Did it fall into the fucking mount again?
Yep.
God damn it. It's stuck on the bell housing again, but because it's too high. Yeah, the stud's still dragging on the fucking cross member. We gained a little room. We're closer now, but it's still the fucking stud is riding on the bottom of the cross member. Okay.
We need help. We need help.
Yeah, wait, holy.
Get on this side.
Well, I wasn't fucking expecting that.
Yeah, I just wiggled it. You're wiggling the stud against that cross member.
You're a fucking genius. I think we still got. No, we're not connected. Has to come towards me. We're pulling on a gas line or a transmission line right now.
Okay, can you hold that? Can you hold out the weight of it?
Wait, 1 second. Okay.
Where is it hooking?
Okay, it has to basically.
Oh,
You see what I mean?
what is that?
That's a transmission line.
It's good. It's clear now.
Okay, we're good. Okay, we're good. It's fucking heavy. Watch your head, dude.
We have to disconnect all, so we have to figure out what we got to disconnect. So here was the biggest problem and why we jacked up the transmission to get a little more room. So while this rear mount stud is hanging up on the cross member, this flange was getting hooked on the bell housing. And so the way I finally worked it out, so I was kind of wiggling it this way and shimmying it where this is kind of rubbing on the cross member, and it finally dropped out. You're just gonna have to trial and error and try to get it out, but jacking up the transmission a little bit, removing the mount from the cross member and jacking it up a little more gave us a little more room for this flange to clear the bell housing. And then once you have that, you just have to wiggle it. You got to first get this mount out of the hole in the cross member, and then you just got to shimmy it. And I think what I finally did is I was underneath there and I pushed the passenger side away and then was just kind of working it back and forth, and finally was able to get this mount stud clear of the cross member. And then once that's clear, you can drop it in. These things, wires actually hooked a little bit on the power steering lines, so watch out for that. They actually hooked when we were trying to rotate this and drop it out. So these got hooked on the power steering lines. And now we got to start swapping parts over. So we got to swap over the mounts, all these vacuum lines, the ADD system, this other mount here. So we got to start swapping parts. So we got to transfer the mounts over because the front differential doesn't come with mounts. Pretty hard, stuck on there pretty good. If you're wondering why we got a rag stuck in here, his drain bolt was stripped, so we couldn't drain it, so that's why we got gear oil going all over the place. All right, so there's one. You can see a little bit of L there. Okay. Oops. So now we're going to remove this 12 millimeter nut that holds this breather and vacuum tubes to the differential. So there is that small one. Now that's free. Be careful because you don't want to bend it. So we got to slide that off. Oh, that just went off by my hands. That was easy. the breather hose, so you slide the rubber hose right off of there. So now this whole thing is free, and so we're going to take off. So we have to take these Torx E14 size nuts out. He's going to try to hold it steady while I break it free, maybe. Okay. There's one with Fred standing on it.
180 pounds for you.
Okay. Okay, that one's broken free. That one's broken free. Now we got to get the bottom one. Okay, so to remove the differential tube, you have two lower 14, what do they call them, E14s? Yeah, you have two lower E14 Torx head bolts here, and then you have two over here. I'm on one of them right now, that are longer ones that go all the way through. So two shorties and two long ones.
Yeah, you're right.
So here's something to note. I don't know exactly what part of the ADD system is this cap, but when I was drawing this thing out, this was basically against the ground and I couldn't see what I was doing. The lip of the socket got underneath this lip and started bending it up. So just be aware of that. Have a good eye on how it's coming out. There's enough room to get it out, but if the socket just moves in a little bit and catches the lip, you're going to start prying up this metal thing is for the ADD system. I don't know what it is. So the factory service manual says to tap the differential tube to get it to disconnect. So we're looking to break this free down here.
It just went.
Can clear, see, and we're having trouble getting this bolt to clear this, whatever this doohickey is. We can't get it out. So, but it's probably clear enough to where we can free it.
Pretty loose. There it is.
There it is. It's caught on my pants.
Nice.
This is the assembly. So now this bolt is going to stay in there. Okay, for right now. All right. We got a hell of a gear oil mess here. We got to get this mount off. This is a 17 millimeter. We're going to try to zip it off with the gun for the rear mount. Took a little persuasion, but it came. It understood who's boss. All right, now there's another one right here, right here. Let's assume that's a 17 too. And the rear mount is free. That greasy mess is going to go back to East Coast Gear Supply. Okay, so that's your rear mount. Fred is just cleaning up the RTV or the Toyota F-Pipe PG off of this connection that we have to swap over to the new differential. Okay, the torque spec for these three mounting bolts for one of the front mounts is 116 foot-pounds. And it's going to be kind of interesting torquing it on the ground like this. Hey, it works. The yoga pose for the front differential mounting cushions works. There we go, 116 foot-pounds. I'm now going to put this rear mount on the rebuilt differential. It goes like so. They're both the same fastener, but it's both same bolt. So one bolt goes in from the bottom and the other bolt goes in from the top. Remember, this is that mount that was hanging us up, dragging on that cross member, giving us all kinds of grief. These two bolts that hold the rear cushion on here are 80 foot-pounds. 80 foot-pounds. Okay, I'm torquing these 80 foot-pounds. Again, this is kind of a weird situation here. I'm kind of holding it with my right hand on the mount that I just put on and pushing away with the torque wrench, and I got it. That's 80. Now I got to get the top one, that is. And this thing is pretty heavy. Just put it on its side there. Okay, got that one to 80 foot-pounds. Okay, so see this gear right here? This gear kind of pops into the differential with a little C-clip, kind of like the CV shafts slide in with a little C-clip into the differential. So I'm going to try to get underneath there and pry up and break it free, maybe. Now we're using the 2 pry bar method. He's holding it. I'm getting underneath. Okay, now trying with big channel locks with tape. Now no tape on these. Hopefully they're not going to fuck up the gears. We just can't get enough bite. Plan B, we're going to just take this cover off. We're just doing more than we wanted to do.
Not anymore.
Oh shit.
Oh shit.
It's still in there. So if we pry underneath, like maybe here.
You going all the way underneath?
No, like right underneath there.
There it is. I felt it. Did that not go through? It had to.
It's not all the way. Let's get it on the bench. Okay, to get this gear out, I altered a little pry bar. You come in from the top of this bearing. This is pretty crazy. So coming from the bearing, you could get in there and then you could pop it free. I don't know why this thing is so hard to get out, this clip, but he's gonna catch it. I'm hitting there. Shit. Okay, let me get a screwdriver then. It's almost out. I can hit it from the side now. I think. Yeah.
That's out. Ow. I got it.
You got it?
Yeah. I mean, I can't pull it out, but I got it.
Oh my god, how fucking retarded is that?
Really? That's
that little thing.
Oh, the GoPro just died.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Fuck me. Okay, here's the MFer that fought us so hard. Here's that C-clip, just like on a CV joint, but this thing fought us tooth and nail. I mean, I don't get it, but anyways, we had to disconnect the differential. As you can see, we took the damn thing apart to punch it out on the vise. So now I'm gonna stick a little grease in here on the splines and on this C-clip. It's a waterproof grease. You just gotta pop it in. Find the gear, pop it in more. Okay, I guess this is a good sign.
We go in?
It's flush, and I turn this and it's turning. So Fred and I concur. Tap on a plastic hammer, it's all the way in. We see it turning when we turn the output shaft, so it looks like it's good. So now we're gonna stick the Toyota FIPG, the orange stuff, here and on the other surface, and then we're gonna bolt this together. Putting some sealer on here. I'm just putting it on my finger. Okay, you get the idea. We're gonna do the other side too.
The cases for.
So FIPG on there. It only could go on one way. You could see the pattern. It's like wider here. So it's got to go on like so. Fred's holding it steady. And he pull on those brackets for me a little bit.
There it is.
There it is.
Nice.
Now I got to get a bolt started. Yeah, those are the shorties.
Oh, there's one long.
The long ones go in the back. There should be a long one still in there, huh?
Yeah, there's one still in there.
Yeah, so I'll get that one started. This is the one right here that we never got free because it won't get past this doohickey, chingadera, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, let's thread lock them. So we're gonna Loctite these with blue 242. Okay, a little blue 242. Now, this one over here that we couldn't get out, we're not gonna be able to Loctite that one because we can never get it past the Dumaflashi. So we're just gonna have to not Loctite that one. We're gonna Loctite all the other ones, okay? So we figure you know how to put Loctite on, so we're not gonna show that. Now that they're all Loctited, we're just gonna snug them up and then we're gonna torque them to spec, and I'll get you that torque spec. So these Torx head bolts are torqued to 58 foot-pounds. It's hard to do this shit when it's off the vehicle. These two. Okay, that one's torqued. Okay.
Torqued.
They're all torqued to 58 foot-pounds. So these tubes might get a little bent on you, these vacuum lines, because they're very small and easy to bend. So they were a little bent, so I just have to pull this whole assembly over this lip and get it in. Then there's a small little, what is that, a 10 millimeter or 12? 12. Get that bolt in there. And then there's this little breather tube. Slide that over like so. And then, boy, we just got to get one more mount on this side right here, and then we're ready to put this thing in, which I'm not looking forward to because it was so hard to get out. So just cinch up this 12 millimeter nut for the lines. No torque spec, just getting it nice and snug. And that's good. All it is holding those lines on. So now we're gonna get this mount right here on. So this mount goes on like so on the inside, away from the CV axle. The bolt goes in from this side too. There we go, that one's started. And get the bottom one started. Okay, we're torquing these to 116 foot-pounds. This is the step on the differential torque method. Okay. I think this thing is ready for installation. Oh my God. This is the part we're dreading, because this thing was a bitch to get out. Pardon my French. I don't even know if French say that, but we're saying it. Okay, so we have this thing balancing on the jack. Probably what's going to happen is we're going to have to muscle this thing up like we muscled it out, but right now we got it on the jack. We'll get it close, and then the rest of it's going to be us bench pressing it and wiggling it and trying to get this thing back in past that cross member. All right. Okay, here goes nothing. Oh God, here we go. You got one side?
No, I'm about to break my thumb. I have no grip on this.
Okay, so we were down to 2 people for a short time, and we couldn't really film us getting the differential in because it took 2 guys, and nobody could really get a good camera angle when we're holding up a heavy differential. So we were able to slide into place, but what helped is see this nut that holds the vacuum line metal tubes and the breather metal tubes. We removed this 12 millimeter nut so we could bend it around the power steering lines, because they have to go up above those power steering lines. So in order to facilitate that, to get the differential in place, I removed that 12 millimeter nut, bent the lines around the power steering line. I kind of pulled on the power steering line and then just bent these because they're really malleable, and then I was able to get them above the power steering line. And then once we had that, Fred and I just bench pressed it and it plopped in place. It was actually easier to get in than it was to get out. We've got the electrical connection, we've got the 2 vacuum line connections hooked back up, and we've got the breather hose connected. We just got to get the hose clamp in place now. So if you were lucky enough to actually get the differential back in, then you got to get your bolts and your nuts for the front mounts back in, and then there's one nut in the back that you have to get back into. And so we'll give you the torque specs for these once we get the bolts back in. Okay, I'm torquing this rear differential mount with the 12mm Allen to 64 foot-pounds. So the front two mounts, the long bolts with the nuts on the top, it's 101 foot-pounds. Go one more time. Okay, so if you followed our lead and jacked up the transmission a little bit to get a little bit of extra room for that flange of the differential to get past the bell housing, when you put these 12mm bolts back in for the transmission mount, torque them to 13 foot-pounds. So here's the setup. Torque wrench on the front, open end, 14mm on the back, just cinching them up. Maybe I can get Fred in here to hold this wrench. The torque spec is 54 foot-pounds. All right, so now that we got the differential in, the mounts all torqued to spec, we've got the drive shaft hooked back up to the differential, that one torqued to spec. We got the transmission mount back connected to the cross member, that torqued to spec. Now for the rest of the job, you just have to follow the steps you would follow in the CV axle video, the one we mentioned earlier. So you've got to get your CV axles back into the differential, pop back in with that C-clip. Then you've got to get it back into the hub right here, the shaft. And then once that's all done, then you lift the knuckle and you drop it into drop the lower ball joint back into the lower control arm. You get your castle nut back on, you get that torque to spec with the fresh cotter pin. Then you get your outer tie rod back connected, torque that castle nut to spec, get a fresh cotter pin in there. And then don't forget to get your axle nut back on, that torque to spec, your dust cover back on. Do not forget to fill your differential, important step. Do not forget to fill your front differential because the differential didn't come with any gear oil. And then get your tires back on, get those torqued to spec, and that's it. So just follow the instructions, the rest of the instructions of putting together everything after getting the new CV axles or rebooted CV axles back in, and you can just follow that video that we've already done and you'll be good to go. All right, we're done with this job and it's nighttime. What does that tell you? It wasn't an easy job. The rear end, well, we've done that before, that was simple. But the front end hung us up. Number one, getting that heavy differential to clear that front cross member while the flange that goes to the drive shaft is hitting the bell housing, that hung us up. So what we did is we undid the transmission mount to the cross member number 3, or is it cross member number 4? I don't know, whatever. The one underneath the transmission mount, we undid those 4 bolts, and then we got the transmission jack underneath the transmission and we jacked it up a little bit so there's a little more room to get that flange that goes to the drive shaft, the output shaft, past the bell housing. So that gave us a little more room. So then we wiggled it a little bit and then I was able to get it out somehow. So I was just wiggling it. That what's hanging it up is the bottom mount, that stud that hangs down is dragging on the cross member, and then up above, that flange that goes to the front drive shaft is hitting the bell housing. So those two things are working against you, but if you just have to get a buddy to help you, it's heavy, you just wiggle it against that stud against the cross member and you're just finally able to tilt it and get it out clear. The other thing that hung up is the metal breather line and the 2 metal vacuum lines hook on one of the power steering lines that goes to the steering rack. So when you start to drop the differential out, those metal lines want to hook on that power steering line, and that's another hang up. So we had to crank on the power steering line to clear the metal line so the differential could finally come out the rest of the way. Getting it back in, the trick was that we got it close, but then we noticed that those metal lines, the breather line and the 2 vacuum lines, were hitting that power steering line again. So I undid the top nut that kind of affixed those lines to the top of the differential, and was able to bend it enough and then pull on the power steering line to get them up above, because those 3 metal lines sit above the power steering lines, not below. So once I did that, then Fred and I were able to rotate the differential in place, and then that back mount, that stud drops into the cross member, and then once you're there, you're good to go. Then you could get the other 2 front mount bolts in. You could get that nut, that 12 millimeter Allen nut that holds the rear mount in place. You torque all those to spec, and so those were a hang up. The other hang up was that East Coast gear supply. It doesn't come with the intermediate shaft number 1, and that intermediate shaft number 1 is held with a C-clip, just like that goes on the end of the CV axle that slides into the differential on both ends, where you have to knock it in and then pry it out. Same type of thing, but that thing fought Fred and I like crazy. We tried all these different methods, nothing worked, so finally we just took the differential apart, and then you saw that we put it on a vise, and then we were able to pound from the top and finally get that shaft out, because the East Coast gear supply doesn't supply that, so you have to take that out of your old differential and put that in. And putting it in was simple, just tap it in with a plastic hammer. So I had doubts that we were going to actually finish this job. I was thinking maybe Fred was going to be spending the night, because this one fought us, but we overcame. We adapted and overcame. Semper Fi. Heartbreak Ridge. Anyways, are you happy with the job, Fred?
Yeah, I am.
Can you see Fred? There's Fred.
Tim and Sean put a crap ton of work into this, and I'm pretty happy with it, and it took all day, so I'm ready to go home.
We started about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's 10 o'clock at night. 12 hours. We took a lunch break, but not that long, so... Is Timmy the Toolman and Sean and Fred the quickest mechanics? No. Do we get the job done? I reckon. Anyways, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing if you subscribe. If you don't subscribe, think about subscribing. You'll get notified every time we load a new video on our channel. So think about it. You might learn something, maybe not. Okay, we are back on another day. Fred didn't have the ARB compressor yet as part of this install, so he went home and did the install himself. So he bought an ARB compressor from ARB, and it came with the wiring harness and all the air lines and everything you needed to do this job. Now, one thing that's going to probably be partly a custom thing is where you mount this air compressor. Some people use the back compartment on the driver's side, that area where you can store a few little things. A lot of people seem to like putting the air compressor there and wiring it up through there, and they do it that way. Fred decided to put it in his engine compartment, so this is on the passenger side, and he had a guy at a four-wheel drive shop make a custom mount, and it's pretty hard to see the mount because it's underneath this ARB. So what Fred had to do is, this is his cruise control module. The cruise control module used to be sitting right here, so he had to shift it over to here to get it out of the way to make room for the ARB compressor. So with the custom mount, he mounted it right here. Now, the power for this is coming directly from the battery. So if you look at this cable right here against the firewall, this leads to all these connections, and this wiring harness comes already done by ARB. All you have to do is wire it to the battery. So the way Fred ran it is he zip tied it along the firewall towards the driver's side. Let me show you the connection at the battery. So it's running along here, and then it's running underneath this module here, and it's got a positive connection, so he's just got it connected right to the battery, the positive terminal, and then it's got a ground, and it's got kind of a double ground. It's got the thinner line and this bigger line, and he's got it connected directly to the negative battery terminal. And now there's also another line that leads from the compressor, and I'll show you that one. So this smaller black line, this is for the switches. There's 3 switches. One to turn the air compressor on. There's one switch that sends air to the rear differential locker, and then there's another switch that sends air to the front differential locker. So that's what that does. So it runs from the wiring harness connected to the ARB compressor, and then it runs to the driver's side and it goes through the firewall. So here's this line again that controls the switches, and you'll see down here there's a rubber grommet that is used for the wiring harnesses for the vehicle, and you push the wire harness through that rubber grommet in the firewall, and then it goes underneath the dash of your vehicle. Now here's the switches. This is the rear air locker, the front air locker, and then this is turns the air compressor on. So he had to remove this bottom panel. If you're wondering how to remove this bottom panel, I actually made a video of replacing dash lights. It's pretty simple. It's a few Phillips head screws and you can remove it. So through the firewall, the wire comes through the firewall, and it's right here. It's this line right here. And then he's got it running up. It's right here, and it's running up to those switches behind that panel. So, and then Fred said that when he was pushing it through that grommet on the firewall, he had to cut a little slit. And what's important to know is that water could find its way into your passenger compartment down at your feet here, because if you cut it and it's not watertight anymore from the wires that come from the factory going through there, you can cause a leak. So it's good to put some silicone or some type of sealant, some like RTV sealant, to where you're not going to get water finding its way, because the water will drip on the wires, go down through that grommet, and then water will drip in your system. So that's a common place when you put aftermarket wires through that grommet, that you'll get water dripping into your bottom of your floor on your driver's side. And then, you know, the wires just run up to these switches, and then that's how you control things. One thing Fred said is a safety measure for the ARB locker system: if you have front and rear lockers, it won't let you lock the front without the rear locker being on first. So it's a protective measure that you don't end up like throwing your front locker on while you're driving down the road. So the rear locker has to be on first before you can activate the front locker. That's a safety measure that ARB has built into their system. What Fred also mentioned is that when you get the ARB air compressor, these solenoids right here, you got one here and one here for the front and rear. These solenoids have to be screwed on with a little bit of Teflon tape for the fittings. So these don't come already connected. You have to connect those. And then these blue lines are the air lines. So one's going to go to the front differential and one's going to go to the rear. So the way he wired it is this one on this side closest to the passenger side fender goes down and around, goes this way and follows along the firewall over here, and then goes towards the rear of the vehicle to the rear differential. This other one over here runs down, goes underneath the vehicle and to the front differential. So we'll get underneath the rig and I'll show you the front differential first. So Fred said, well, this fitting right here, this comes from East Coast Gear Supply. This fitting is already screwed into the differential. They drill a hole and they tap it, the threads, and they screw in a fitting. And then what you have to do is you have to slide the blue hose over the fitting. He says there's a nut that goes over that connection, and then you put this spring over there, and that makes the connection solid. And then he also mentioned that you don't want the hose like super tight, and you want to keep it away from hot surfaces like the engine itself or the exhaust, because you'll burn a hole through it, and then you got a hole, well, it's not going to work. So let's show you how he routed the rear one now. So now I'm showing you how he ran the air line for the rear locker. So he went from the ARB compressor on the passenger fender, he routed along the firewall, and then brought the line down along the driver's side of the vehicle. So he's got it zip tied in different locations along these brake lines underneath the driver's side. There's your fuel filter right here, and then he brings it over up there. He looks like he zip tied it to the parking brake connector from inside the vehicle. So that's the parking brake line he's got it zip tied to, and then we'll go back. So he's zip tied it to a couple points on the emergency brake cable, and then he goes over and then down into the fitting. And again, you slip the rubber hose over the nipple, you put the nut on, you put that spring over the top, and then you're good to go. And he just left a little bit of play for a little bit of articulation, so the blue hose has a little bit of movement when he's four-wheeling and the differential's dropping a little bit. So that's how he ran the lines. So Fred's going to turn the compressor on to kind of give you an idea what it sounds like and what it's doing.
Okay. So that's on now, and then it already has pressure from the last time I used it.
So he says pressure is already in the system from the last time he used it.
And now the rear in my case. Okay.
So he just flipped the switch to lock the rear.
So now the rear is locked.
Okay.
Now the front's locked too. I just flipped it.
So I just heard a little bit of puff of air, and the front is locked now.
Okay. Now I'm gonna release the front. You'll hear it like a.
He's going to release the front. So there's a little puff of air.
Then I'm gonna release the rear.
Oh, a bigger puff. Okay.
And then lock her off, or compressor off.
This
Okay.
completes the Fred East Coast Gear Supply ARB Locker Special video. Is that a good title, Fred?
Yeah.
Okay, it's the Freddy Special. So, what did we learn from this video? Number one, getting that front differential out is a pain in the butt. It is hard. If you try to tackle this yourself, good luck. You probably have to be bench pressing a lot more than I can bench press. Much better to have a friend help you to manipulate that heavy differential out safely so you don't end up dropping it on your head. So get a friend to help you. It's not an easy thing to manipulate. Or what makes that front differential so hard to get out is that it's a tight space. You have the bell housing up above you, and then you have that cross member down below. And you have to push the differential up far enough to get it to clear that stud for the rear mount. And there's just no easy way about it. You have to manipulate a little bit. You have those metal lines that go to the breather and those vacuum lines, and those hang up on the power steering send and return lines. That's another hang up. So, and then the same thing getting it back in. Just as difficult it is to get it out, it's difficult to get that darn thing back in. The rear is a piece of cake. You pull the axles, you pull the third member, you slap it back in with some FIPG, bolt it up, slap your axles back in, it's good to go. Front differential, a lot harder. And because the way East Coast Gear Supply sets that thing up, you have to also take that intermediate shaft out, which is what I found is that getting that intermediate shaft out of the old differential wasn't exactly easy. I finally gave up and just took the differential apart more to where I can knock that intermediate shaft out from the other side. And then you got to get everything back together, and it's not an easy job. This was the hardest job I've done on a 3rd gen 4runner to date. It's not an easy job. So if I wasn't clear, it's a hard job. So if you're not feeling confident, maybe don't tackle this job, or get another buddy that's knowledgeable in it and has a good set of tools and is strong to help you muscle that thing. Because Fred and I struggled quite a bit. Wouldn't you agree, Fred?
Yeah, that was a pain in the ass.
Yeah, Fred agrees. It was a pain in the butt. So, but it's doable. If you take your time, if you're not in a rush, you can get it done. But it was one of the harder repairs. It took quite a while, and Fred got home really late back to Sacramento from San Jose. So thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We appreciate you watching. We appreciate you subscribing. Take care. Bye-bye.